Kevin Doran was born on December 27, 1937, son of Irish immigrants Molly and Willie Doran. Kevin had an older brother, Stan, who was a child prodigy tap dancer who almost went to Hollywood and later served in the U.S. Army in World War II and was a local lawyer for the rest of his life. As a young boy, Kevin used to pretend to be an announcer around the house, playing records and introducing them into a pretend microphone. Kevin began working in radio at WLEA at the age of 16. 2 years after his father's death, he graduated from Hornell High in 1956 and went to college at SUNY Geneseo for a year and then transferred to Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa. He was a hit on the radio there and was written about some 30 years later in the Dubuque newspaper, where they recalled how funny he was on the air, making prank phone calls to the Washington Monument or calling celebrities who were at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. Kevin came back to Hornell after graduating in the early 1960s. He worked several jobs, in radio, as a reporter for the Hornell Evening Tribune and Star-Gazette, and at Hornell High School as an English and then history teacher. As a teacher, he was remembered for holding exciting political mock conventions and for his great lectures at HHS. He also did brief stints in radio in Washington, D.C., and in Mississippi. In the South, he was known for getting into numerous arguments with everyone from segregationist Governor Ross Barnett, who Kevin humiliated on his radio show. He'd also get into it with a local Klansman who would call the radio station and threaten him for being respectful to African Americans in his newscasts. During his time in Mississippi, Kevin would walk out of restaurants if he saw that they had white-only, black-only water fountains. And once, he yelled at a group of white men in a restaurant who were harassing a little African-American girl. His life as a Northerner, who was outspokenly opposed to segregation in Mississippi, brought with it some dangers. Once, during his first trip to Mississippi in 1964, he had heard a news tip that the bodies of the missing 3 civil rights workers had been found. He came running into the radio station he worked at there and told someone in the hallway, and one person looked puzzled and replied, "That's not where the bodies are." Everything went silent, and Kevin knew he could say nothing, as who was he supposed to go to? And Kevin was right. As it turned out, Mississippi law enforcement was arrested for taking part in the killing of the 3 civil rights workers. After returning from his second radio job in Mississippi, he wrote about it in a newspaper article for the Star-Gazette. A Northerner in Mississippi. Somehow, after Kevin published that article in the Star-Gazette, the owners of the radio station he worked at in Laurel, Mississippi heard about it and called Kevin up and yelled at him for putting Mississippi in a bad light. Doran was a skilled newspaper writer and covered everything from local news to Robert Kennedy's visit to Hornell in the mid-1960s. Kevin married Mary Margaret Gibbs in 1966. They had 5 children and 9 grandchildren. He was in many ways most remembered for working 3 days straight in Hornell on WLEA radio during the flood of 1972.
Many people have decided to stay. The mayor has said, and other officials we've spoken with this morning have said, please don't stay if there is any question in your mind. So the simple rule of thumb would be, if you have any doubts at all as to your safety, get out. Don't stay behind to save a chair. All right. Briefly to summarize the situation in our area. In Hornell, flooding continues in various parts of the city. One bridge is out, Hart Street. Other bridges, according to the mayor, seem to be holding, and the water level seems to be holding at this hour in Hornell. In Canisteo, the situation is much worse. There, about 400 people have been evacuated, and most of them are at Summers Hall or at the school in Canisteo. In Alman, the situation is also rather critical, and we have sent a reporter to that scene to try to get reports for us directly from there. We've not spoken with any officials in Almond or in Alfred. Our reports have all been unofficial. But the situation in Canisteo at this hour seems to be the worst one.
After the June of 1972 flood, Kevin bought WLEA from State Senator Charlie Henderson. He sold WLEA to Chicago millionaire Herb Chanik in 1980. Kevin always said Chanik was his favorite boss. Kevin was later to buy the stations back in the early 1990s. Chanik left the Hornell Radio Company in great shape after having started up an FM music station, WCKR. For years, Kevin did play-by-play during the Hornell Babe Ruth Summer League games.
Pitch swung out and hit out into center field, a mile away, and that ball is up against the barrier. 2 runs will score easily. Kilichowski is going down to second, and thanks to a good throw from Albrecht in center field, they hold him at a double. And that has to be, I think, the longest hit of the game. Kilichowski knocked one right off the pole in left field, but this one even outdistanced that. What a hit. Just a few more feet, it would have been out of the ballpark.
And Kevin's favorite part of radio was working the talk show host job. He was known for his great sense of humor.
Well, yeah, but what does non sequitur mean? You keep throwing it. It doesn't follow. That's right.
Yeah, what do you... I have a PhD, Kevin. Please.
God help us if we don't know that.
Well, we were going to be talking about all these heavy issues today on the program. I don't want to bring all those heavy issues up to Gary Gray. But let's talk about...
Well, can I... One quick heavy issue?
Sure.
How's your weight doing?
An otherwise dull Republican effort in New York.
You certainly are nasty to the Republicans.
Well, why shouldn't I
We're
be?
an exciting bunch out there,
Are you
Kevin.
kidding?
Sometimes he would take calls on major local issues.
1482 is the number, and good morning.
Kevin, I just heard that lady, who's causing the merger and why the merger in the first place if the state is not mandating it, and if both hospitals can exist.
Probably the first question is the state mandating it, and what did they actually say in writing? That would probably be the first thing, right?
Right.
Kevin would also do local interviews.
Chief Ted Murray, Hornell PD. We're going to talk about, first of all, these cameras they've got up.
Well, we currently have 8 cameras in different areas in the city, and the Housing Authority, in addition to that, has 6 cameras. And we also can mobile into their cameras.
The real owners of St. James, the ones that call the shots, is an organization called Catholic Health East. Is that right?
You're correct.
Okay. And if you thought it was the local board of directors and so forth, you better rethink it. There was an effort, probably still going on, to affiliate with a bigger hospital like Guthrie or Strong. Apparently, the Sisters of Mercy and Catholic Hospital East wanted Guthrie to assume all the debts of St. James, and Guthrie said no.
Kevin would also do interviews with some notables.
He was a vital player in the Reagan administration. Don Devine.
I'm Vice Chairman of the American Conservative Union. I'm a senior scholar at the Fund for American Studies.
Well, we are very privileged today to have David Limbaugh with us. Tell me about your book and what are some of the things that have you so concerned?
It's my contention, and I don't really think it's very controversial, that Obama is engaging in policies that are fundamentally changing America like he told us he would.
And many of you, I'm sure, have read either his books or his columns when he was with Newsweek. Arnold de Bourgrave was a senior editor for Newsweek. So, Mr. de Bourgrave, it's a real privilege to have you on the program.
Kevin, delighted to be with you.
Mr. de Bourgrave, you were with Newsweek, and as I understand it, it was while you were there in a position of considerable influence that you came upon this, what you call the spike, the KGB influence. Can you tell us about that?
Certainly part of a mindset that winds up by being tantamount to thought control. It's a sort of no enemies on the left syndrome.
We're on the line this morning with Malachi Martin, author of many, many books. His latest is called The Keys of This Blood.
Good morning, Kevin, and how are you doing this morning?
Wonderful, and let me tell you, I've got a host of questions for you.
John Blundell wrote a portrait of Margaret Thatcher, and as I recall, you know her rather well.
Yes, I've known Margaret since 1972.
Best-selling author Ed Klein, formerly with the New York Times and Newsweek.
A meeting took place in August 2011 that Bill Clinton put together at his home in Chappaqua, New York. Is that he had done a secret poll showing that his wife Hillary could beat Barack Obama in the Democratic primary elections in 2012.
Kevin worked in radio at WLEA until just a few weeks before his death on October 21st, 2015. After his death, former students whom he taught at Hornell High School wrote about how they learned so much from him in his history class. Announcers who'd worked for him recalled his great voice, and what a skilled announcer he was.